Scientists spent years chasing a family that made no medical sense. These people went to bed at midnight, woke up wide awake at 4 in the morning, and never once complained of being tired. No coffee, no naps, no afternoon crash. Doctors assumed they were lying, exaggerating, or simply lucky. But when researchers finally decided to sequence their DNA, they found something buried inside a single gene that changed how we understand sleep forever. This is the story of the people who barely sleep and feel completely fine, and the tiny genetic mutation hiding behind it. If you enjoy stories about the hidden code inside our bodies, stick around because this discovery is stranger than most people realize. For most of modern history, doctors believed one thing without question. Adults need 7 to 9 hours of sleep every night, and anyone claiming otherwise was either wrong, sick, or heading toward a health disaster down the road. Sleep researchers built entire careers warning the public about the dangers of sleep deprivation, and for good reason. Chronic short sleep is linked to heart disease, memory loss, weakened immunity, and a long list of other problems. So, when a neurologist named Yinghui Fu at the University of California, San Francisco, started hearing from people who claimed to function perfectly on 4 or 5 hours a night, her first instinct was skepticism. She assumed these people were fooling themselves, running on willpower and caffeine, quietly building up a sleep debt that would eventually catch up with them. Then she actually studied them. The first case that caught her attention involved a mother and daughter. The mother woke up naturally at 4 in the morning every single day, full of energy, ready to exercise before sunrise. Her daughter did the same thing. Neither of them used alarm clocks. Neither of them felt groggy. Neither of them needed weekends to catch up on missed rest because there was no rest being missed. When Fu's team examined their sleep patterns in a lab, monitoring brain waves and body movement through the night, the results were consistent. These two people were getting real, high-quality deep sleep. They simply needed far less of it than everyone else. That was the moment the research shifted from curiosity to serious science. If these people were truly healthy and truly needed less sleep, then somewhere in their biology there had to be an explanation. The team began collecting genetic samples from the family, comparing their DNA letter by letter, hunting for a difference that could explain something so unusual. It took years of painstaking work, but eventually they found it. A tiny mutation in a gene called DEC2. Just one changed letter out of billions in the human genome, sitting quietly in a gene that helps control the body's internal clock. In people without the mutation, DEC2 helps regulate how much sleep the brain thinks it needs. In people carrying this rare variant, the gene works differently. It appears to shorten the amount of sleep required to fully recharge the brain and body, without triggering the negative effects that come from ordinary sleep deprivation. To confirm this wasn't just a coincidence, researchers turned to mice. They engineered lab mice to carry the same mutated version of the gene. The results were striking. The altered mice slept significantly less than normal mice, yet showed no signs of impaired memory, no unusual stress hormones, and no decline in physical performance. Their bodies were simply built to run on less rest, the same way the human family had been living their entire lives. This was the first solid proof that short sleep could be genetic rather than dangerous. Not everyone who sleeps 5 hours a night is silently damaging themselves. A small number of people are built differently at the molecular level, and their bodies have adapted to thrive on less. But DEC2 was only the beginning. As Fu's lab expanded their search, recruiting more natural short sleepers from around the world, they discovered that DEC2 wasn't the only gene involved. A second mutation turned up in a gene called ADRB1, which is active in a region of the brainstem involved in wakefulness. When researchers studied this gene in mice, they found something remarkable. Activating the neurons carrying this mutation made the mice want to wake up and stay alert, even after very little sleep. It was as if this version of the gene told the brain that a shorter rest period was already enough. Then came a third gene, called NPSR1, found in another short sleeping family. This gene is involved in a signaling system connected to arousal and stress response. The mutated version appeared to make the carriers more resistant to the effects of sleep loss, allowing them to perform well on memory and attention tests, even after being kept awake far longer than normal volunteers could handle without serious mental decline. Each of these genes works in a different part of the brain, yet they all point toward the same outcome. A small number of people have inherited changes that reset how much sleep their body actually needs, and these changes appear to be passed down from parent to child, generation after generation, hiding quietly inside ordinary-looking families. Here is where the story becomes genuinely surprising. Researchers estimate that natural short sleepers, meaning people who biologically need only 4 to 6 hours of sleep and suffer no negative effects, may represent less than 1% of the world's population. That means, in a stadium filled with 50,000 people, only a few hundred might carry one of these rare genetic variants. Everyone else who tries to survive on 5 hours of sleep is simply exhausted, running on borrowed energy, and quietly damaging their long-term health without realizing it. This distinction matters enormously because for decades, ambitious professionals, students, and even some public figures have bragged about needing very little sleep, treating it as a badge of discipline or willpower. The genetic research tells a very different story. For the overwhelming majority of people, cutting sleep short is not a lifestyle choice that can be trained or willed into existence. It is simply sleep deprivation, and the body keeps score even when the mind insists it feels fine. So how can you tell the difference between someone with a real short sleeper gene and someone who is simply used to running on empty? Scientists who study this condition point to a few consistent signs. True natural short sleepers wake up without an alarm clock, feeling genuinely refreshed rather than forcing themselves out of bed. They do not experience an afternoon energy crash. Their mood stays stable throughout the day instead of swinging toward irritability by evening. On weekends or vacations, when there's no reason to wake up early, they still wake up early because their body is not making up for lost sleep. It simply doesn't need more. Compare that to the far more common experience of chronic sleep restriction. Someone forcing themselves to survive on 5 hours usually needs caffeine to function, feels a noticeable slump in the afternoon, becomes more irritable as the day goes on, and sleeps significantly longer on weekends when given the chance because their body is desperately trying to repay a debt that has been building up all week. That weekend catch-up sleep is one of the clearest signs that a person is not a natural short sleeper. Their brain is simply seizing the first opportunity to recover. The genetic differences between these two groups go deeper than just how long they sleep. Researchers studying short sleeper mutations have found that these genes appear to change the efficiency of sleep itself, not just the duration. In other words, it is not that these individuals are somehow cheating the system and skipping necessary rest. Their brains seem to accomplish in 4 or 5 hours what an average brain needs 7 or 8 hours to complete. Deep sleep stages, the periods responsible for physical repair and memory consolidation, appear to happen faster and more efficiently in people carrying these mutations. Some scientists compare it to the difference between a computer running an old inefficient program and one running a streamlined, optimized version of the same task. Both eventually get the job done, but one takes far less time and far less energy to reach the same result. This raises an obvious question that excites both scientists and sleep-deprived commuters everywhere. Could this discovery eventually lead to a treatment that gives ordinary people the benefits of a short sleeper's genetics without needing to be born with the mutation? Researchers are cautious, but intrigued. Some early laboratory experiments have explored ways to mimic the effects of these genes using compounds that influence the same biological pathways. In theory, if scientists could safely activate the same mechanisms that make natural short sleepers so efficient, it might be possible to help people sleep less while still getting the full restorative benefits of a normal night's rest. However, most experts stress that we are far from any real-world application. The brain's sleep systems are enormously complex, and tampering with them carries serious risks. Simply forcing your own sleep shorter without the underlying genetics does not activate these efficient repair processes. It only produces the harmful effects of ordinary sleep deprivation, since your brain and body were never built to skip that recovery time. There's also an evolutionary angle to this discovery that fascinates researchers. Why would a mutation like this exist at all? One theory suggests that throughout human history, having a small number of individuals within a group who could function well on very little sleep may have provided a survival advantage. Early human communities living in dangerous environments would have benefited from having some members alert during the night, watching for predators or threats while the rest of the group slept deeply. A tribe with a mix of long sleepers and short sleepers could maintain round-the-clock vigilance without anyone suffering the full burden of staying awake all night, every night. If this theory holds true, natural short sleepers may represent an ancient evolutionary adaptation that has quietly persisted in a small percentage of the population, passed down through families for thousands of years, largely unnoticed until modern genetic sequencing technology finally allowed scientists to identify the exact mutations responsible. Interestingly, researchers have also noticed a pattern among certain short sleeper families. Many of the natural short sleepers studied in Fu's research describe themselves as unusually optimistic, energetic, and driven, tending to fill their extra waking hours with productive activity rather than simply lying awake. Whether this personality trait is directly connected to the same genes, or whether it developed simply because these individuals have more functional hours in their day, remains an open question that scientists are still investigating. What makes this research especially significant is how it forces us to reconsider outdated assumptions about laziness, discipline, and sleep. For years, popular culture praised people who bragged about surviving on minimal sleep, treating exhaustion as a symbol of ambition and hard work. This genetic research quietly dismantles that myth. The vast majority of people who claim to thrive on 5 hours of sleep are not secretly superior or more disciplined. They are running on a deficit that their body will eventually make them pay back. whether through weakened immunity, slower cognitive function, increased risk of heart disease, or long-term damage to memory and mood regulation. True short sleepers are not proof that everyone can train themselves to need less rest. They are a rare genetic exception, similar to how some people can eat enormous amounts of food without gaining weight due to an unusually fast metabolism. Their biology does not represent a lifestyle achievable through sheer willpower. It represents an inherited trait present in only a tiny fraction of the population. This distinction carries real consequences for public health. Sleep researchers worry that stories about short sleeper genes, when misunderstood, could encourage ordinary people to cut back on their own sleep, believing they might also be one of the rare exceptions. In reality, without genetic testing, there is no reliable way for an average person to determine whether they carry one of these mutations. The far more likely explanation for feeling fine on 5 hours of sleep is simple adaptation to chronic exhaustion, where the brain becomes accustomed to operating in a fog so gradually that the person no longer notices how impaired they actually are. Scientists studying long-term sleep deprivation have run experiments showing exactly this effect. Volunteers restricted to 6 hours of sleep per night for 2 weeks straight reported feeling only slightly tired, yet their cognitive performance on memory and reaction time tests declined as severely as people who had been kept completely awake for 24 hours straight. The unsettling part of the study was that the sleep-deprived volunteers had no idea how badly their performance had suffered. Their subjective feeling of tiredness simply did not match the objective decline happening inside their brain. This mismatch between how tired we feel and how impaired we actually are may explain why so many people mistakenly believe they have adapted to less sleep, when in reality their brain has simply stopped signaling the full extent of the damage. Natural short sleepers, by contrast, show no such decline. Their cognitive test scores after 5 hours of sleep match or exceed the scores of ordinary people who slept a full 8 hours. This is the clearest evidence that their reduced need for sleep is a genuine biological difference, not a trained tolerance for exhaustion. As research into these genes continues, scientists are working to identify additional short sleeper mutations, since DEC2, ADRB1, and NPSR1 likely represent only the beginning of a much larger picture. The human sleep clock is controlled by dozens of interacting genes, and researchers suspect there are more undiscovered variants waiting to be found in families around the world who have simply never had their DNA examined for this specific trait. There's something deeply humbling about this entire area of research. For centuries, humans assumed that sleep was a fixed, universal requirement, the same for everyone, non-negotiable and unchangeable. Modern genetics revealed that a small number of people were quietly living outside that rule the entire time, their bodies rewriting one of biology's most basic requirements through a single mutation passed down through generations. It also serves as a powerful reminder of how much individual variation exists within our species, hidden inside genes that look almost identical at first glance, yet produce completely different lived experiences. For the rest of us, the lesson is less exciting but far more important. If you are not one of the rare few carrying one of these mutations, and there is currently no simple test available to the general public to confirm it either way, your best strategy for health and long-term performance remains getting the sleep your body actually needs. Feeling like you can manage on 5 hours does not mean your brain agrees with that assessment. The gap between how alert you feel and how well your brain is actually functioning can be larger than most people ever realize, and the science on that gap is becoming clearer every year. The discovery of the short sleeper gene did not give humanity a shortcut to skip rest. What it gave us instead was proof that some of our oldest assumptions about the human body were incomplete, and a reminder that even something as universal as sleep can hide extraordinary exceptions written directly into our DNA. Somewhere out there, a small number of people are living proof that the rules of biology are not always as fixed as we once believed. The rest of us are simply going to need our full 8 hours to keep up.